11:30. On the calendar today, a measure on usage fees for bank debit cards. The Senate will break between 12:30 and 2:15 Eastern for their weekly party lunches. They'll resume work at that time. Now, live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Almighty God, source of all life, give our lawmakers this day your grace and wisdom. Because of your grace, may they find such inner peace that it will prompt them to reach out to one another and accomplish great things for your glory. Because of your wisdom, may they face today's challenges with confidence, knowing that you order the steps of good people. Lord, give all who labor on Capitol Hill a special discernment to know and to do your will. Remove their strain and stress, and let their ordered lives confess the beauty of your peace. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., June 7, 2011. To the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Jean Shaheen, a senator from the state of New Hampshire, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President.
Madam President.
The Majority Leader.
I note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander.
Madam President.
The Republican Leader.
I ask that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Yesterday I came to the floor to call on Democrats in Washington to wake up and to open their eyes to the signs we see all around us that the policies of the past 2 years are making our economy worse. Home values are still falling. Manufacturers are showing the weakest growth in nearly 2 years. Nearly 14 million Americans are looking for jobs and can't find them. For many, there's a nagging feeling that things will actually get worse before they get better. And who can blame them? Over the past 2 months, 2 ratings agencies have come out with dire warnings over the status of America's stellar credit ratings out of fear that we won't get our fiscal house in order. One has already put our rating under review, and the other has threatened to do so if we don't do something in a matter of weeks, literally weeks. Yet Democrats here in Washington are doing nothing. The President is patting himself on the back for an auto bailout that's expected to cost the taxpayers billions, and Democrats in Congress would rather talk about an election that's a year and a half away. For 2.5 years, Democrats in Washington have paid lip service to the idea of job creation, even as they've relentlessly pursued an agenda that is radically opposed to it. And the results speak for themselves. An annual deficit 3 times bigger than the biggest deficit we ever ran during the last administration. A national debt that we now know will this year be greater than our nation's entire economy. Chronic unemployment. But here's the other problem. Democrats don't want to admit that the government-driven policies of the past 2.5 years are part of the problem. And until they do, nothing will change. Unless Democrats change their priorities and their policies, the threats of a downgrade will not go away. The debt won't get any smaller. Businesses won't create the kind of jobs we need to build prosperity. Madam President, we need to change course. And a good place to start is with trade. The President himself has explicitly acknowledged in front of cameras that free trade agreements will create tens of thousands of jobs for American families who need them. Yet now the President's advisors say that the White House plans to hold off on this bipartisan job-creating initiative unless it can spend more money on a government benefits program first. At a time when 14 million Americans are looking for work, they actually want to hold off on these known job-creating agreements in exchange for a green light to spend more money. It's truly astonishing. I mean, how do you explain to an American manufacturer or a farmer that they have to lose business to France because some member of Congress wants a better benefits package for their allies in organized labor? You can't. The White House is free to advocate on behalf of unions. That's certainly their prerogative. But this time it's gone really too far. When the White House is actively depriving others of jobs because some union boss isn't getting his way, it's lost touch. So this morning I'm calling on the administration once again to send us the 3 pending trade agreements that the President himself has said it would create tens of thousands of American jobs, and to leave trade adjustment assistance out of it. There are 47 duplicative federal retraining programs out there for unemployed workers, 47 of them. No one is denying or minimizing the hardships they face. But we will not allow the White House to deny one group of people the chance to get a job in order to have a bargaining chip in the negotiating benefits for others. It's not fair, and it's not right. We need to separate these issues, deal with them independently, and move ahead with these trade deals. And we should also be doing even more to create jobs by moving forward with something that's been a cornerstone of good trade policy in this country since 1974. I'm talking about trade promotion authority. If the President is really serious about doubling U.S. exports and creating the jobs that would go along with it, he should call on Congress to approve trade promotion authority, and the Congress should do it. I would also suggest that any discussion of trade adjustment assistance be done only as part of the debate over extending trade promotion authority. That's the way it's been done for decades. Trade promotion authority would give the President the ability to negotiate job-creating trade deals and allow them an expedited procedure to get an up or down vote in Congress so that opponents couldn't block the deals or amend them on behalf of parochial interest or as a short-sighted favor to union allies. Without the protections afforded by trade promotion authority, Congress may never consider another trade deal ever again. In other words, there will be no more trade agenda. American businesses want to expand and they want to hire. Here's one way to help them do it that's right in front of us. There's no excuse for inaction. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.
President,
The Majority Leader,
I ask consent to call the quorum be terminated.
without objection.
Mr. President, following leader remarks. The Senate will be in morning business for an hour with Republicans controlling the first half and majority controlling the final half. Following that morning business, the Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to S-782, Economic Development Act. The Senate will recess from 12:30 until 2:15 today to allow for weekly caucus meetings. We hope to begin consideration of the FDA bill as soon as we can, which likely now it appears will be tomorrow morning when cloture is invoked on this. Madam President, on the news this morning, as I was doing my exercise, I heard the announcement. 10 years ago today, President Bush was, you could hear him, his voice, celebrating the tax cuts for the wealthy. He said, I know we have these huge surpluses, but these monies are the people's money, and therefore he was going to do something about it, and he did big time. He certainly did away with those huge surpluses we had, which amounted to trillions of dollars. He did that in a number of different ways. What President Bush did is, first of all, we had a program that was developed during the Clinton years called PAYGO. What that meant, Madam President, is if you had a new program you wanted to initiate, you had to pay for it, either with new revenue or take money from an existing program to put it in that program. It worked extremely well. That's one reason, and one of the main reasons, we were able to develop the huge surpluses that we did during the Clinton years. We were paying down the debt in the Clinton years. Some said too quickly. Well, another way that the President got rid of that huge surplus was the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. The war in Iraq alone now is estimated to be about $1.5 trillion, all borrowed money. Now, Madam President, we also know that how important it is to create jobs. Now, we, as a result of the President Obama finding himself in the huge hole he found himself in as a result of the policies of the Bush administration, he decided that something had to be done. And we passed what is called the Economic Recovery Act. And it created millions of jobs and saved millions of jobs. Was it enough? No, but it was the best we could do, because we could only get 3 Republicans to help us on that. And I appreciate and always will their support, Senator Snowe, Collins, and Senator Specter. But they were those that determined what we could spend and not spend within certain parameters, and we felt that there should be more infrastructure spending. We did the best we could. Wish we could have done more. So we have done some things to help significantly the hole that President Bush created for us. Now, this Congress, we've also done some things. We've focused on jobs. We know how important those jobs are. FAA bill, Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization. We've extended that short term 19 times. I talked to Randy Walker, the head of McCarran Airport, the 6th busiest airport in America. They can't let contracts for runway repairs because they only have 1 month to do it a lot of times. Can't do that. All kinds of projects that would create thousands and thousands of jobs around American airports would happen if we could have an FAA bill. We passed it here. It's been held up in the big dark hole in the House of Representatives. Nothing's been done. We haven't been able to complete the conference on that. And 280,000 jobs either created or saved haven't been completed. That's been months and months. We have an antiquated air traffic control system in America. We want to improve it. That's what it was about, saving and creating jobs. We felt it was important to do something about patents. Senator Leahy has been very faithful in reporting bills out in his committee, and we finally said, okay, let's bring it to the floor. And after a lot of work, we got it done. More than 6 decades have lapsed, and we haven't done anything with our most important, one of the most important things we could do is protect our patent system and make it better than what it was. We did that. We passed it here, sent it to the House. Nothing has happened. They haven't voted on that bill. Nothing's happened on that. That's very unfortunate that we have not been able to get those 2 bills. The patent bill is 300,000 jobs. FAA bill, 280,000 jobs. Math's pretty simple. That's a lot of jobs, Madam President, and that's been held up. We know that we felt it was extremely important that we do something about jobs, and we did that with something that has worked so successfully in the past. And that's a bill we brought to the floor to help small businesses innovate, invent, and invest in new jobs. What a wonderful program it has been. We tried to get that reauthorized. It was killed here in the House by many, many amendments that had nothing to do with the underlying bill. So we had to take that bill off the floor after spending, I think, 6 weeks on the bill and having not been able to get it accomplished. We brought this bill to the floor. It would help small businesses innovate, I say, invent and invest in new jobs. The Republicans simply said, no, we're not going to do that. Madam President, that jobs bill was so important. The electric toothbrush was invented with a small innovation grant. Many, many other examples. That's just one of hundreds and hundreds. So that's really too bad that we haven't been able to do something about that. The only thing we hear from the House of Representatives, rather than creating jobs, is destroying Medicare as we know it. The American people don't like that. Republicans don't like it. Independents don't like it. Democrats don't like it. Young people don't like it. Old people don't like it. It's not a good piece of legislation. Overwhelmingly, it has been just a big zero. But that's what we've gotten from the House of Representatives. That's our main accomplishment this year. Now, my friend talked about free trade agreements. I'm not a big fan of free trade agreements. My voting record is in accordance with that. I think if you ask people in Nevada, boy, hasn't NAFTA helped us a lot? They would just sneer and walk away. We keep talking about free trade agreements, but where is the fair part of those trade agreements? Shouldn't we be more worried about our American workers than workers in other places? I think that certainly is the case. So in keeping with the theme of jobs, I thought it was important that we do something about creating jobs. We talked about patents. I've talked about, of course, what we did with the FAA bill. I talked about what we tried to do with the Small Jobs Innovation Bill. So what we decided to bring up is EDA, Economic Development Administration. Madam President, this has been something that's been in effect since 1965. It's been a wonderful program. In the last 5 years, we've invested $1.2 billion, creating more than 300,000 jobs. For every dollar invested, we get $7 of private capital. It's a pretty good deal. We wanted to bring that to the floor and have a debate on it, pass it, put more money in the stream of creating jobs. Every dollar we invest, we have $7 that comes from the private sector. We plan to work this week on debating and reauthorizing this Economic Development Administration bill, which for more than 45 years has created jobs where they're most needed in economically distressed communities. As I've said, in just the last 5 years, more than 300,000 jobs. This was our first bill of this new work period because creating jobs is our first priority. But Republicans are stopping us from moving to it because creating jobs, it appears, is the last thing they care to do. They're more concerned about what jobs are being created in Colombia or Panama or Korea than what are being created here in America. The merits of reauthorizing this job-creating administration bill is very clear. EDA works with businesses, universities, and leaders at local level, so it creates jobs from the bottom up. It helps manufacturers and producers compete in the global marketplace. I repeat, Madam President, it's a great investment. 7-to-1 is an incredible return rate. Now, last night, I had to file cloture on this bill. I hope that we don't have to invoke cloture on this bill. All right, we have it set up now, so we're going to have a vote in the morning at an hour after we come in. Maybe during the recess that we have where our caucuses meet, maybe the Republicans will be able to bring in these people that are stopping us from doing this and move to it and do something meaningful here on the Senate floor for the rest of this day and tomorrow, rather than invoking cloture, waiting 30 hours, and doing nothing. We need to start doing things to create jobs. FAA, we did it. House has killed it. Patents, we've done it. The House has killed it. We tried to do small jobs innovation, killed here in the Senate. We're now trying to do EDA. At this stage, we're not able to move forward on it. We are ready to create jobs, we Democrats. We've done it before with programs like the Economic Development Administration, and we're ready to do it again. The American people are desperate for stable and secure jobs. All they ask of us is that we do our job, and we haven't been doing that because we have been prevented from doing it. Why haven't we passed the FAA bill? Why haven't we completed work on the patent bill? Why were we stopped from moving forward on small jobs innovation? Why are we unable to move to the EDA bill?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for 1 hour, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first half and the majority controlling the final half.
Madam President?
The senator from Utah.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to speak till I finish my remarks.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise today to speak in support of our pending trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. Right before Memorial Day, the Finance Committee held 2 trade hearings. The first was on the U.S.-Panama Trade Promotion Agreement. The second was on the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement. Earlier, the Finance Committee held a hearing on the U.S.-Colombia Trade Promotion Agreement. These agreements have been thoroughly reviewed by our Finance Committee. In fact, given that the Colombia Agreement was signed in 2006 and the Panama and South Korea agreements in 2007, these agreements have been more than thoroughly reviewed by U.S. elected officials and U.S. agencies over the past several years. For the sake of the U.S. economy and for the sake of our country standing in the world, it is clearly time to take the next step. It's time for President Obama to submit implementing legislation for these agreements to the Congress. The U.S. trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea are good agreements that will benefit the United States and American workers. According to the nonpartisan U.S. International Trade Commission, these trade agreements, once fully implemented, will likely increase U.S. exports by over $12 billion and grow the U.S. gross domestic product by over $14 billion. Put simply, our trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea will boost U.S. exports, expand the U.S. economy, and thus promote job growth in the United States. The President and members of his administration understand this. They have spoken on numerous occasions on the benefits of the U.S. trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea for our country. Please bear with me as I review some of their statements. 4 months ago, President Obama, in his State of the Union address, 4 months ago, expressed his support for the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement, which he stated will support at least 70,000 new American jobs. He then asked Congress to pass the Korea Agreement as soon as possible. Last December, President Obama noted that the South Korea Agreement is expected to increase annual exports of American goods by up to $11 billion. In that same speech, he said, "I look forward to working with Congress and leaders in both parties to approve this pact. Because if there's one thing Democrats and Republicans should be able to agree on, it should be creating jobs and opportunities for our people." I couldn't agree more. Just last month, the President stated that he believes that a recently announced labor action plan of Colombia serves as a basis of moving forward on a U.S.-Colombia free trade agreement, and this represents a potential $1 billion of exports, our exports, and could mean thousands of jobs for workers here in the United States. After meeting with President Martinelli of Panama, President Obama said that he is confident now that a free trade agreement would be good for our country, would create jobs here in the United States, and open up new markets with potential for billions of dollars of cross-border trade. The President's principal trade advisor, U.S. Trade Representative Ron Kirk, just 2 weeks ago, recognized that the U.S.-Korea trade agreement will support more than 70,000 American jobs. And he noted as well that it will result in over $10 billion in increased annual exports from the United States. In May, Ambassador Kirk said that Colombia represents $1.1 billion in new export opportunities for the United States. Regarding Panama, he stated that the Panama Agreement will provide access to one of the fastest-growing markets in South America. In speaking on all three pending trade agreements, only 2 weeks ago, Ambassador Kirk said that the pending agreements with South Korea, Panama, and Colombia are at the forefront of our efforts to open new markets. Secretary of Commerce Gary Locke in April emphasized the need to pass the U.S.-Korea Trade Promotion Agreement through Congress as soon as possible. He also said that the administration feels similar urgency to get the pending Panama and Colombia trade deals done. He noted that all three pending trade agreements will move us even closer to President Obama's National Export Initiative goal of doubling American exports by 2015. Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack has spoken on behalf of the administration in favor of our pending trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. On May 12th, he stated that the paramount reason to implement these three pending trade agreements is jobs. He went on to note that these trade agreements will result in over $2 billion in additional sales of U.S. agricultural products. Secretary Vilsack has also stated that until we complete these three trade agreements, U.S. agriculture will not have a level playing field in Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has spoken on behalf of on the benefits of these three trade agreements for our country. When discussing the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement last month, she stated not only that this agreement will increase U.S. exports by billions of dollars and thus support tens of thousands of American jobs, but also that implementing the South Korea agreement is profoundly in our strategic interest. When speaking on the subject of trade and economic growth 2 weeks ago, Secretary Clinton said that one of our top goals is to complete free trade agreements with Colombia and Panama. Now, someone might say there is a lot of upside to these agreements. Billions in new exports, billions in economic growth, and thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of new jobs. What's not to like? So I have a question. What's the holdup? What on earth is the administration waiting on? This country needs all the jobs and economic growth we can get. So why does the administration refuse to submit these agreements to Congress for consideration? Despite declaring the benefits of these agreements for the United States at every turn, the Obama administration is sitting on them, hurting our economy, and undermining our job growth. With respect to international trade, the administration has adopted a policy of delay and dither. I see few signs that the administration is working hard to move these agreements through Congress. I don't see administration officials walking the halls of Congress in attempts to build support for the Colombia, Panama, and South Korea agreements. While the administration has said great things about these agreements, as I've mentioned, its efforts to build any type of momentum to advance them on Capitol Hill are tepid at best. On trade policy, the administration is all talk and no action. Or, as my friends from Texas might put it, on these agreements, the President and his team are all hat and no cattle. This is definitely a strange economic strategy. While our economy remains shaky, unemployment remains high, the unemployment rate at 9.1%, and while the rest of the world watches in bewilderment as the United States lets other countries take over our export markets, the administration just sits there. It just sits there. Actually, let me correct myself. The administration doesn't just sit there. Instead, the administration is actually going out of its way, finding new excuses for not moving forward with the implementation of these trade agreements. Despite countless speeches from the President and his administration about the importance of the three trade agreements to American exports, creating American jobs, and strengthening our alliances with key friends, his administration busies itself concocting more roadblocks, more delays, and more excuses. It's time to be blunt about this. This schizophrenic trade policy is doing nothing but hurting American workers, hurting jobs and undermining our recovery. I believe that each free trade agreement standing on its own merits and with the full backing of the White House and congressional leadership will pass with significant bipartisan margins. But we are now told that we will never have a chance to vote on any of these agreements unless the White House and Democrat senators get what they want on trade adjustment assistance. Let's put this in perspective. Our economy teeters on the brink with a weak economic recovery. 1 in 7 Americans happens to be on food stamps. Durable goods orders dropped 3.6% in April. Last month, the economy only added 54,000 private sector jobs, and unemployment went up to 9.1%. The real estate market remains in tatters, with the average single-family home price falling by 33% since 2007. We face a historic spending crisis that has generated warnings from Standard & Poor's and Moody's that the federal government faces a downgrade in its debt rating, an action that would be devastating to this nation and to America's families. To forestall this coming crisis, leaders in Congress and the administration are meeting on an almost daily basis to determine how best to get our nation's deficits and debt under control. Every spending program and expenditure is being reviewed to find cuts to get our fiscal house in order. Everyone recognizes that these 3 trade agreements will promote jobs and economic growth at a time when both are in short supply. Submitting and passing free trade agreements would be a quick and cost-free way of generating economic growth. And yet, in an environment where Congress is desperately attempting to encourage economic growth and rein in spending to avert a fiscal crisis, the White House and many Democrats are delaying the pro-growth trade agreements until we get more government spending through TAA, the Trade Adjustment Assistance. And for what? If an expanded TAA is so critical, where is the record of success to prove it? What evidence is there that giving some workers who have lost their jobs more benefits than others improves U.S. competitiveness or is a responsible way to spend taxpayer dollars? The mere fact that more people are in a program and that more taxpayer money is being spent is not evidence of success. Congress does not pick winners and losers in the movie rental business. When Blockbuster employees lost their jobs because of the rise of Netflix, nobody stood up and said we should create a new big spending program, new big spending government program to help displace Blockbuster employees. President Reagan recognized the problems inherent in this program when he said, "The purpose of TAA is to help these workers find jobs in growing sectors of our economy." There's nothing wrong with that, but because these benefits are paid out on top of normal unemployment benefits, we wind up paying greater benefits to those who lose their jobs because of foreign competition than we do to their friends and neighbors who are laid off due to domestic competition. Anyone must agree that that is unfair. That's what President Reagan said. By tacking the expansion of TAA onto the stimulus bill and refusing to allow Congress to vote on the extended TAA program on its own merits, it is unclear whether there is, in fact, bipartisan support for this expanded program. It's billions of dollars more. If the expanded TAA program can stand on its own merits, as each of the FTAs can, then it should be introduced and voted on separately from the free trade agreements. Demanding an expanded TAA as another excuse to delay voting on these important agreements is irresponsible and self-defeating. At the same time, by not submitting these agreements for approval by Congress, the administration is doing a disservice to the American economy and at the same time is letting down some of our strongest allies. Nothing good can come from this continued inaction. Make no mistake about it. Failure to submit these agreements is a failure in presidential leadership. I'm convinced that the window for the administration to submit these agreements will soon pass. Given the upcoming election season, I'm afraid that if these agreements aren't submitted this summer, they never will be. The President needs to act. I appreciate the President's goal of doubling exports. Having goals is great, but we all know that if you don't do the work and take action, goals become little more than false hope. They never become reality. The President and his Cabinet admit that these agreements are essential to their goal of doubling exports and creating jobs here at home. Yet the action necessary to achieve that goal and create those jobs, submission of the agreements, remains in the distant future. Instead of benefiting from these agreements, we watch the days slip by, the explanations and excuses pile up, our export markets decline, and our economy suffers. I strongly urge the President to submit implementing bills for the Colombia, Panama, and South Korea trade agreements to Congress this summer. There is no time like the present when it comes to encouraging economic growth and business creation. And I admit they want to help their union employees throughout the country, who are less than 7% of the private sector economy. What about the millions and millions of others who are losing their jobs, not because of this, but because we don't export? And we don't have these free trade agreements with these three very, very important countries to us, both from a neighbor standpoint and from a strategic standpoint. Madam President, I yield the floor.
The Senator from Tennessee.
Madam President, it's my understanding I have 10 minutes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And if I happen to go 8 minutes or so, would you let me know I have 2 minutes left?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I rise today to speak about something that's affectionately known as the Durbin Amendment. During the Dodd-Frank debate that occurred about a year ago, and upon its passage, there was an amendment brought to the floor called the Durbin Amendment, which dealt with debit cards and regulating debit cards. This was an amendment that never had been debated. There had never been a hearing on this amendment, and in the height of, I think, people being very concerned about the large financial institutions in our country, this was an amendment that passed. I voted against it. I thought it was bad for us as a country to allow the Federal Reserve to begin setting prices for specific industries as the Durbin Amendment called for. But in any event, the Durbin Amendment became law, and I know that numbers of people in this body have been contacted since that time about the effects of the Durbin Amendment. What the Durbin Amendment did was tell the Federal Reserve to set prices on debit cards based on incremental cost. Let me say that one more time, based on incremental cost. In other words, when a business does business, there are fixed costs and there are incremental costs. And it would be like saying to a pizza company that sells pizzas across the counter that the only thing they could charge for is the dough. They couldn't charge for anything else that went into the cost of the product that was being sold. I'm obviously opposed to price setting. I realize we don't have 60 votes in this body to just do away with price fixing in general as it relates to debit cards. And I also realize that a lot of people in this body believe that there is a problem, if you will, with an almost monopolistic type atmosphere as it relates to debit cards in general. And so what I've tried to do is seek a better solution than the one that has come forth. Senator Tester and I have worked together. We've made actually 3 revisions to an amendment that I hope we're going to be voting on over the course of the next 48 hours, maybe 72 hours. And it's been crafted in a way to bring people together. And what it really does, the essence of it, is it directs the Fed, instead of setting prices on debit cards based solely on the incremental cost of the transaction, it allows them to consider all costs, both fixed and incremental, something that anybody in this body that happened to be in business certainly would want to be the case. So, look, I know there's been a lot of populism in this body, and a lot of people have tried to rail, if you will, against financial institutions. And I know a lot of people have empathy with retailers that find themselves in a situation where it's difficult for them to negotiate prices as it relates to debit cards. What this would do, though, is still leave debit cards as a regulated entity. It's not the solution I would ultimately like to see, but I think that's a solution we may be able to come to in this body. It would leave it regulated, but it would direct the Fed to consider all costs, to consider fixed and incremental costs. Again, it's a very common sense measure. I know there's been lots of discussions about the solution to this Durbin Amendment. I know it's an issue that most people in this body would like to see go away. A lot of people feel like they're being pitted, if you will, between the financial industry and retailers. I think the solution that Senator Tester and I, working with Senator Crapo and others, I think the solution that we've come up with is one that meets the common sense test. It brings people together around a policy, solving a problem that was created, again, without a lot of discussion on the Senate floor and certainly no hearing. So I would just ask the other members of the body to please talk with their staffs about the most recent changes that have been put forth in this amendment. This is not something that's trying to stave off or keep the effects of the Durbin Amendment from taking place, but what it does is put a more fair structure in place where the Fed can actually look at all costs relating to a transaction. Again, think about it. If you were selling pizzas in a pizza restaurant, a retail establishment, and you were told that the only thing you could do is charge for the dough that went into the pizza, nothing else, none of the rent, none of the other costs that go with operating your facility, obviously you wouldn't be in business very long. I think all of us want to see the financial industry continue to innovate. I think all of us see a day when we're going to be able to basically pay bills with our electronic devices, and continued innovation is going to take place, which causes our economy to expand. And I do believe that this amendment, as shaped by numbers of people in this body, meets the common sense test. I think it provides a good solution for those people who actually voted for the Durbin Amendment on the floor and realized afterward that what was happening was putting in place this price structure that really is not sustainable, if you will, for debit cards. And over time, no question, over a very short amount of time, quickly, is going to be very, very adversely affecting consumers all across this country. So, Madam President, I thank you for the time. The Tester-Corker Amendment is an amendment designed to create a more productive solution than was offered under the Dodd-Frank debate and the Durbin Amendment. And I hope that all members of this body will look at this seriously. I know everybody's been contacted. This is a very contentious issue, I understand. This solution that's being put forth is being put forth, again, to solve a problem, not to take one side or another. It leaves the debit card industry as a regulated industry, but allows the Fed, as it should, to take into account both fixed and incremental costs as they look at what the pricing structure ought to be. In addition, I know a lot of people have been concerned about what's going to happen with small financial institutions. Obviously, their costs of debit transactions is much higher than the larger institutions in this country. People have been concerned about the impact on them, and what this would also do is give the Fed the ability every 2 years to see if the policy that they put in place is adversely affecting the smaller, the rural banks, the community banks, or smaller credit unions, to make sure that if they are being affected adversely, then they can recommend, not prescribe, but recommend some legislative fixes of that. So, Madam President, again, I hope members of this body will see this as a reasonable solution. I urge all of you to contact me personally or Senator Tester personally to talk this through if you have any questions, and hopefully we can bring to an end this contentious debate over an amendment that was passed on the Senate floor without any hearings, and I think all of us know is going to create a lot of unintended consequences for people all across this country. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor. Madam President, I notice the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
pending quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. We are discussing the federal budget here in Washington on a nonstop basis. And one thing that seems very noteworthy is that instead of working to create jobs to help grow the economy out of the recession, Republicans are still trying to end Medicare as we know it, as it has been relied on for generations of Americans, to pay for tax cuts for millionaires. This is the Wall Street Journal describing the Republicans' plan to essentially end Medicare. The Republican plan to end Medicare would put insurance company officials between seniors and their doctors. You no longer have a claim to the individual benefit under their plan. You get a voucher that goes to the insurance company, and you're at the mercy of the insurance company. That would raise, first of all, they raise drug costs for seniors from day one by repealing the repair that we did to the donut hole. And then, of course, 10 years out, you're left at the mercy of private insurance companies. And the effect of that is that, on average, seniors will pay nearly $6,400 more out of pocket every year as a result of this Republican plan. Now, Rhode Island has a lot of seniors, and I don't know of a lot who have an additional $6,359 every year to spend on health care costs that would no longer be covered. It's worth noting that one of the first things that happens when you take the dollar that goes to Medicare and give it to private insurance companies instead is that the 2 or 3% administrative costs that Medicare takes out, which leaves you, let's say, 97 cents of the dollar to pay for health care, that jumps to between 15 and 25%, leaving you only 85 to 75 cents of your dollar to pay for health care because the private system is so inefficient and eats up so much administrative cost for salaries and for quarreling with doctors and hospitals about payment and all of that. And they don't even use this to reduce the deficit in a significant way. The savings achieved by ending Medicare and raising seniors' health care costs by nearly $6,400 every year out of pocket are being used to pay for, guess what, more tax cuts for America's millionaires and billionaires. Every 33 seniors who have to pay that extra $6,400 will add up to one millionaire's $200,000 bonus tax break. The Republican budget makes average cuts of $165 billion per year in Medicare between 2022 and 2030, and that gives $131 billion in tax cuts for millionaires, billionaires, big corporations, and big oil. $165 billion out of seniors' pockets, $131 billion to millionaires, billionaires, big corporations, and big oil. We think it's time for our colleagues to get serious about creating jobs to grow our economy out of this recession and to abandon their attempts to ram through a clearly ideological agenda against Medicare, indeed that ends Medicare, and helps the nation's very wealthiest at the expense of seniors and the middle class. Let me talk just for a minute about where we are in the tax code with our wealthiest versus seniors in the middle class. Clearly, we agree that we have to bring our finances into balance. Clearly, we have to avoid a debt limit failure that causes a default by our country for the first time in its history. Eliminating unnecessary spending should be part of the federal balancing equation. Indeed, through multiple appropriations bills this year, we've pared back billions of dollars in federal spending, and we will do more. But bipartisan consensus seems to end here when we move to the revenue side of the federal budget. Just last week, Republicans filibustered a measure that would have ended $21 billion in unnecessary tax breaks for the largest oil and gas companies in the world, companies that have been enjoying record multi-billion-dollar profits and do not need continuing support for the American taxpayer. That made the Republican message clear. In balancing the budget, closing tax loopholes, and repealing corporate subsidies is not on the table. The debt and the deficit, they tell us, are the most important problems facing the country, but evidently they're less important than protecting tax subsidies for big oil. That's what their vote proves. They'll cut education, police protection, health care, job training, and environmental protection, but won't touch tax subsidies for large corporations or for millionaires and billionaires. So there's a basic question underlying all this, and that is, are the super rich paying a fair share? Well, each year, the Internal Revenue Service publishes a report that details the taxes paid by the highest earning 400 Americans. I gave a speech a few weeks ago showing from what was then the most recent data that in 2007, these super high income earners, earning nearly $1/3 billion each in just 1 year, paid a lower tax rate than an average hospital orderly pushing her cart down the halls of a hospital in Rhode Island. I showed the Helmsley building in New York, big enough to have its own zip code, because we know from IRS information gathered by zip code that the wealthy and successful occupants of this building actually paid a 14.7% total federal tax rate. There's the building. There's the Helmsley building in New York. And the people who live there do very well. They're very successful, which is wonderful. That's the American way. They're very well compensated. That, too, is the American way. But what's different is that they actually paid a 14.7% total federal tax rate, which is lower than the average New York janitor or doorman or security guard pays. If averages hold, the very successful and well-off inhabitants of this building are paying a significantly lower tax rate to the federal government than the doorman who works for them, than the security guard who keeps an eye out for their security, than the janitors who clean up the halls. Well, the most recent IRS report is out about the top 400 from 2008. So let's take a look at that information. The top 400 incomes in America in 2008 had an average income each in that 1 year of $270 million. It's a pretty good year when you can make more than $250 million in a single year. That's really the American dream big time. But what they actually paid in taxes, those 400, on average, was a rate of 18.2%. That's their total federal tax rate, all the taxes put in. What did they actually pay? Not what the nominal rate is, but what did they actually pay? The IRS calculated this on average. This is not an estimate. This is the IRS's calculation. So although we spend a lot of time debating around here whether the top income tax rate for the wealthy should be 35% or 39.6%, folks, that's not what they pay. The tax code is filled with special provisions that tend to either exclusively or disproportionately benefit the wealthy. So the top 400 income earners in the country pay an average tax rate of 18.2%. So who else pays an 18.2% tax rate in this country? Well, if you're a single filer, you hit 18.2% when your salary gets to $39,350. When you're making $39,350 your federal taxes, income and withholding, payroll taxes, combine to 18.2%, just like the 400 millionaires and billionaires who made actually over $250 million in the same year that this taxpayer would have made less than $40,000. And what does that equate to in terms of jobs? Well, the Bureau of Labor Statistics for the Providence, Rhode Island labor market says that on average a truck driver will earn about $40,200. At that income point, $40,200, that average truck driver is paying the same tax rate as the 400 biggest income earners in the country. They each earned over $250 million. They paid 18.2%. The truck driver earns $40,000. He'd be paying 18.2%, maybe a little over. And if that truck driver gets a raise, or if he or she decides they're going to work a second job at night and increase their income a little bit, guess what? They would then be paying a higher tax rate than those 400 super high-income earners. In fact, the highest income earners pay a rate far below what people who think their average income earners actually pay. And of course, tax inequality extends beyond just individuals. At a time when household budgets are strained, profitable corporations are paying just about their lowest share of federal revenues in 75 years. If you go back to 1935, you see that regular Americans and corporate America evenly split the responsibility to fund our country's obligations, to pay for America's expenses. Then in each of these following years, the ratio between what corporations pay in revenues to the government versus what individuals pay broke through these ratio levels. By 1948, individuals were paying twice as much in revenues to the federal government than corporations. By 1971, regular humans, regular Americans, were paying 3 times as much of the revenues of the United States of America as corporations were. 1981, it broke through 4 to 1. For every dollar that an American taxpayer paid to support this country, corporations just kicked in a quarter. And in 2009, it broke through 6 to 1, meaning that the average American, the ordinary taxpayer, the individual human being, puts in $6 of revenue to support this country for every $1 that corporate America contributes. So when people say how overtaxed corporate America is, it is worth looking at this record of ever-diminishing contribution by America's corporate community to our nation's revenues. And of course, the Republican filibuster of our efforts to strip big oil subsidies that would have put $21 billion back into taxpayers' pockets or reduced the debt and the deficit by $21 billion is noteworthy in this light. Even against this rapid decline in corporate tax support for American government compared to a huge run-up in what individual Americans pay, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle insist on continuing to support tax subsidies for big oil while they're making the biggest profits any corporation has ever made. Let's now look at another. We looked at the Helmsley building a minute ago. Let's look at a different building here. Let's look at the, let me take these down for a moment. Let's look at a picture that our Budget Committee Chairman Kent Conrad uses. This was taken in the Cayman Islands. It's a relatively nondescript building, not worthy of particular note, except that over 18,000 corporations claim this building right here as the place where they are doing business out of. 18,000 corporations, really? Do we think 18,000 corporations are doing real business out of that building? As Chairman Conrad has pointed out, the only business going on in that building is funny business, monkey business with the U.S. tax code. This is estimated to cost us as much as $100 billion every year. And for every one of those $100 billion lost to the tax cheaters hiding down there in the Cayman Islands, honest tax-paying Americans and honest tax-paying American corporations have to pay an extra dollar or more to make up the difference. We recently voted for a continuing resolution here to fund the government for the remainder of the fiscal year, and in it I supported and my colleagues supported belt-tightening across many agencies and programs, including even cuts in the accounts that fund senators' offices. So we're not against cuts, but serious people understand that we can't just cut our way back to a balanced budget. There simply isn't enough to cut. Not since 1960, more than half a century ago, have we had a balanced budget at the revenue levels as a percent of GDP that the Republican House-passed budget proposes. Madam President, when our tax system permits billionaires to pay lower tax rates than truck drivers and allows some of the most profitable corporations in the world to pay little or no taxes at all, even if we had no budget deficits, fairness and equality would demand that we address these preposterous discrepancies. Our budget crisis, however, brings new urgency to the problem. As we continue to debate ways to close the budget gap, I hope that my Republican colleagues will revisit the potential to significantly cut the deficit by addressing tax loopholes, tax gimmicks, tax subsidies, and the daily injustice to the ordinary taxpayer when the wealthiest and highest income Americans pay tax rates that are the equivalent to an ordinary truck driver in Rhode Island. And your basic lawyer or realtor or doctor are paying rates far, far higher than the super, super rich. I see that other colleagues have come to the floor, so I will yield the floor to them and appreciate very much the attention that has been paid to these remarks.
Mr. President.